If we're on a journey, remember being allowed to go on a journey before the lockdown? It matters which way we are going. If we get a train, it's important we're on the right line. At one time, I did quite a lot of traveling by train as part of a job I had then. And there was one time I got on a train. I was rushing. I jumped on as it was moving off. And we set off. And it dawned on me that I was on completely the wrong train. Didn't strike me as having a great spiritual significance. It just showed what a complete buffoon I am. But if you're in that situation, you can't do much about it. You can't go and ask the driver to turn around. And all I could do was get off at the next station and hope there was a train back before next Tuesday week or whenever. Now, which direction we're going, which destination we're going to, is the crucial question that Paul's dealing with in Romans 8 and verses 5 to 11, which is our passage this morning. I'll read that. Those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh. But those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit. To set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. For this reason, the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. And those who are in the flesh cannot please God. But you are not in the flesh. Paul is writing to Christians here. You are in the Spirit, since the Spirit of God dwells in you. Anyone who does not have the Spirit of Christ does not belong to him. But if Christ is in you, though the body is dead because of sin, the Spirit is life because of righteousness. If the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will give life to your mortal bodies also through his Spirit that dwells in you. Now, the context for that passage comes from the beginning of Romans 8, and it says God sets us free. He puts us right with him through what Jesus has done. So the question that arises for everyone who's lived since then is, are we going to be part of it? Are we going to take up the offer of what Jesus has done? And Paul, in verse 1 of Romans 8, gives this great triumphant yell, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. But not everyone yells along, because the Christian life is tough. It goes against our natural instincts, what's described as the flesh in those verses I read, and it leads sometimes to trouble. It often looks as if we'll get a better deal by just following the ways of the world, following the ways of the flesh. And the two ways of living are set out in verse 5 as being living according to the flesh or living according to the Spirit, and in verse 6 as setting our mind on the flesh or setting our mind on the Spirit. So the flesh here is the sinful nature, human nature, focusing on ourselves. The Message version of the Bible describes it as obsession with self, as opposed to paying attention to God. There's an example I saw in the papers yesterday. A chap who's described as a happiness guru with his 10 top tips for happiness during the lockdown. They all sounded lovely. Plan your day, balance pleasure and purpose, listen to music. Oh, lovely. But they were virtually all entirely about me, all according to the flesh, according to Romans 8, obsession with self. And they completely left God out of the picture of happiness, pushing away the God who has made us and loves us, the God who went to the cross for us and calls us to receive untold riches from his hand. How can you look for happiness without that? That's the way of the flesh. And it sounds like a lovely ride, but it's on the wrong train, and a train that is hurtling to a fatal crash. Because, verse 6, to set the mind on the flesh is death. It matters which train we're on. It's not just like saying, well, today I'll wear a blue shirt, tomorrow I'll wear a green one. Surface stuff doesn't really matter. The way we live won't make any difference. God will accept everyone in the end. Sadly not. To set the mind on the flesh is death. Verse 7, the mind set on the flesh is hostile to God. And verse 8, those who are in the flesh cannot please God. So the way we choose goes to the depths of our beings. Our Old Testament passage for our service this morning was Ezekiel 36, talking about what kind of heart we have. And God's saying, take a living heart from me. Ezekiel 36 verse 25, God says, I will sprinkle clean water upon you and you shall be clean. Now that could sound a surface thing, but verse 26, a new heart I will give you, a new spirit I will put within you, my spirit, and I will remove from your body the heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh, which here is not a negative thing, but a living heart. It's as deep as it goes. A heart of stone is dead. It's a heart that lives according to the human nature, focused on me. But God says, let me, and I will give you a living heart and put my own spirit within you. And there is no lockdown that will keep God's spirit away from us, and no distancing between him and our hearts. So which train are we on? To set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the spirit is life and peace. It doesn't matter how plush the train of setting our mind on the flesh is, how comfortable the seats are, how good the food and drink in the buffet are, how beautiful the scenery is. It leads to death. It cuts us off from God, in whom alone is life. But the train which sets its mind on the Spirit may be a bumpy old ride and take us through some tough neighborhoods, but the destination is life and peace. That's the best of life now and life beyond this one. So in verse 10, Paul says, if Christ is in you, though the body is dead because of sin, the Spirit is life because of righteousness, Jesus' righteousness. The body is dead because of sin. Well, we all head for physical death because of the brokenness of the world caused by sin. The question is, will that be the end for us? And if we trust in Jesus, the answer is no. Verse 11, if the spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will give life to your mortal bodies also through his spirit that dwells in you. If his spirit in us, death is just a gateway, and a gateway to infinite joy that lies beyond it. They say that the 18th century evangelical minister Henry Venn, when he was told that he was about to die, was so thrilled and overjoyed at the thought of dying that he lived another week. That's the right approach. We can't have God living in us and be headed for death in any eternal sense. All who are in Christ have God in us. So that will increasingly make us focused on his spirit, increasingly relying and focusing not on ourselves, but on him. Verse 11 again, if the spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will give life to your mortal bodies also through his spirit that dwells in you. That's the jackpot, isn't it? He is with us now, and he will give us resurrection to share the life of Jesus forever. So let's remember the two trains. By nature, we are all on the train bound for destruction. But by God's grace, Jesus has provided a ticket for the train heading for life and peace. If we're not sure which train we're on, it's time to recognize that we have a choice and to make sure we choose the right destination. But if we are on that journey, let's grasp it. Let's constantly remember with wonder and with worship that God has called us and saved us and put his spirit within us. And let us let that spirit have free reign in our lives. And as we have the good news that God has not given up on us, let's think how we can share it with the world around us, where so many do not live according to the Spirit and are on the wrong train.